Dr. Kevin Gazzara is a senior partner at Magna Leadership Solutions, a certified positive intelligence and ICF coach, and spent 18 years at Intel leading leadership development through Intel University. Dr. Kevin, welcome to Corporate Elements. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Robbie, thank you so much for sharing me with your audience. I hope to give them some very, very practical tips on what I've learned over the last 30 plus years, and hopefully they can use it to build their teams.
For sure. Could you tell us about your journey from Intel to founding Magna Leadership Solution and the kind of work you do today with organizations and leaders?
Sure. Well, my background is, I did my undergrad in engineering and business, did my MBA, and then ultimately went off and did all my doctoral work in organizational leadership because that's my passion. I spent about 10 years in dealing with heavy equipment. I worked for a company called Transamerica de Laval. They made steam turbines and compressors, and that was my first job out of college. And I came in as a marketing engineer. I was a product manager. I was a GM for a small division there. But really what I found is that my passion was around computers and video and helping develop and create great teams. So I was fortunate enough that there was an opportunity to go to work for Intel. I joined their digital video products group and worked there for 18 years. But I had a personal goal that I wanted to retire at 50. And fortunately, I was able to do that. And while at Intel, I spent my first half of my career there in the technical side, with, managing products for chips and boards and computer stuff. And then I ultimately found that I loved doing teaching for Intel University and moved into managing Intel University for the US. And then my last 6 years, I managed Intel's management leadership development programs for the world. And it was a wonderful job. We used to train 2,500 managers and leaders in 10 different countries. And when I retired from Intel to create Magna Leadership Solutions, we had just finished training our 40,000th manager. So I got pretty good at that. And what I recognized was that I really wanted to work with small to medium-sized organizations that didn't have $10 million budgets and help them develop their leaders so that they could have better teams and be more successful. So I left and we created Magna Leadership. Actually, we just celebrated last week our 19th year. Every year's been better than the last. I took two of my colleagues with me, Dr. Ali Lakhani and Marlene Lundy, and we started we started it, and it's been a wonderful journey. I encourage people that if you have that desire, make sure that you plan, make sure that you have enough money in the bank so that you can invest while you're not making money, because usually the first 18 to 24 months, it's a little bit more challenging, particularly if you've given up that nice corporate paycheck. But ultimately, I found that if I get up every morning, I get to do stuff I love every day and help people, that ultimately the money comes as a byproduct rather than as a product. So that's kind of my journey. And in addition to that, as you had mentioned before, Robbie, I about 5 years ago, I went and did my ICF certification, International Coach Federation, and Positive Intelligence certification. And I did that primarily because we have a program called our Leading Forward Academy. It's a 6-month program. And we do all levels of leadership from shop floor supervisors all the way up to CEOs and presidents. And what we found is a lot of the executives wanted additional coaching. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be a coach, even though I had been doing coaching for 20 plus years, I probably should go and get officially certified and learn the tools that, are good foundational tools for becoming a great coach.
Wow, that shows like decades of experience. And my question next was that who typically reaches out to you to Magna Leadership? And I guess the professionals, the executive, and the small businesses now you're coaching for leadership. I understand that the organizations spend millions on leadership training, yet disengagement, burnout, and turnover continue to rise.
Yes.
What do you think that is?
Well, one of the things I've learned, particularly through my doctoral studies, is, because I did all my doctoral work on building high performing teams. One of the things that I learned was that, most organizations do leadership training, but they don't do leadership development. Let me describe what the difference is. leadership training is they recognize, oh, I want to get somebody better in communication or in conflict or critical thinking or leadership, whatever it is, and they send them to a training program. It's one day, maybe two, could be 3 days, but it's they get exposed to some good tools. They do a little bit of practice, and then they go back into the workplace. And the big challenge is, they've been gone for a day, so now they have an extra day of work that's been sitting there. And most of the stuff that they've learned goes onto the bookshelf. And, they may get a little piece of that, but because it hasn't become part of a habit or kind of built into their DNA, it doesn't stick, right? So even though they're spending, hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, they're getting good information, but because it's not embedded into a system, it doesn't stay with the individual. So what we recognized when we left Intel is that you need to create a system. And we have a program called our Leading Forward Academy. It's a 6-month program. And it's a combination. It embeds what we call GALE, great guided and applied integrated learning. So we call it the GALE concept, and that's our ideas. And the thing is it becomes, we don't do training, we do development. So the typical sequence looks like this: is the groups come in. We've done groups as small as 5 or 6. We've done groups as large as 36 at a time. The ideal kind of the sweet spot is around 18 to 20, 24 people or so. Gives you enough time to focus and practice. So we have a series of workshops on all the different key elements of things that are important for leaders. And then we have a 4 to 8 hour workshop on that. We do it live or virtual. We've done them all around the world. We pair the people into what we call capability partners. We don't call them accountability partners. A capability sounds less policing, and they have to meet on a weekly basis. We send them reinforcement messages for what they've learned, and there's an action item. And the action items are, we don't do homework. The action items are all around giving people opportunity to practice in their real jobs. So an example might be is if we've gone through a conflict session, here's a quick tips on how to handle that. And next time you have a conflict with your staff members or someone isn't producing, try this tool, right? And then 2 weeks after the main session, we bring them back. We do a mastermind of 60 to 90 minutes. People share all of their successes and failures. And then in the meantime, we have, myself and my team are available for people who are having challenges to provide them coaching as necessary. And we repeat this over and over and over again, for over a 6-month period. And typically I would say right about the third month, as we're going through the workshops, what we recognized is most of the responses and how to approach things start to become second nature, where they don't think, oh, I have to go open up a book or whatever. And because they've practiced them in little tiny snippets continuously through that period of time, what happens is it really allows the culture to change. And I would say to anyone, as you're evaluating any kind of organization that's going to provide you leadership training or management training, is ask them, is this part of a system or is this a one and done? And if it's a one and done, it'll probably be entertainment. We called it edutainment, right? You're going to get good edutainment. But the thing is it's not going to stick, and you're probably not going to get the full return on investment. So, is spend the time, whether it's a 3-month program or 6-month program, a minimum of 3. You need to practice this over and over and over again, but do it without homework where it becomes part of the job. And if you can do that, then you'll see the behavior change that you want. And I would say, Robbie, most of our, 80 or plus more percentage of our clients are return clients. They either refer us to someone else, or they, have the next group of managers or leaders that are coming in. And we work with small to medium-sized companies, but we also work with smaller organizations or divisions within big companies. We don't do big global change for, 100,000 people companies, but we may work with a 100,000 person company with their engineering department or their purchasing or their supply chain, where it's more smaller and contained. So that's my recommendation. hire someone, whether it's us or anyone else, that's going to provide you something that's going to give you behavior change.
I agree. Behavioral change is not easy. And like you explained the difference between training and development, I understand that training is about learning specific skills for the current role. But since you coach and you come back and rediscuss, you speak about the different perspectives every time. And the development is the continuous personal and professional growth for the future opportunities. That is quite
And
insightful.
you need to build that habit, right? So the key is that it needs to be. You should have to think about it. Like I built my morning habits and how I work on projects and so forth, and all of these are based around the foundational principles. Actually that we wrote about in our first book. If anyone's interested in a book, we wrote a book called The Leader of Oz. We took the story of the Wizard of Oz and we wrote a business parable about it. And it's really about how do you develop teams, but we did it in a very fun way. We wanted something would be read by everyone and could be read at every level. And it's done really well. We're getting ready to do our third printing of it. But if anybody wants to know the system that we've created, get the book. You can buy it on Amazon or anywhere else. And I think you'll find it very, very insightful. It's very academically grounded with myself and Dr. Ali Lakhani, who was one of my business partners and also a doctoral student of mine. Did some amazing work on his leadership tools that he developed. And we wanted to create an academic foundational book, but we didn't want it to sound like a textbook. So there's my pitch for the book.
Definitely, we will input the link for our listeners in the description. One question is that many professionals are promoted because they're technically excellent. They are trained into the process and into the role, but nobody teaches them how to lead people. What's the biggest mindset shift from manager to leader?
Well, I think the biggest shift is, managers really manage things. They manage processes, they manage tasks, manage schedules, and they do a good job. And leaders really lead people, right? It's much more about doing people development. And what we found through some research has been that why leadership is so difficult for most people is that most people like to see what I would call causational response, right? That if I put in an hour here, I'm going to get an hour there. If I spend an hour on process improvement, it's going to make the process run faster for an X period of time. And that's more management kind of thing. And with the research that we've done with probably close to 3,000 or 4,000 people, has been that most people are what I call causational managers or leaders. They want to see the cause and effect. And true leaders are more correlational. And what I mean by correlational, that they're putting in the time focusing on the people, developing the people, and getting resources for the people, identifying their strengths and weaknesses, developing the weaknesses, connecting different people. And it's all really people focused. You still have to have some of the management things, whether you're doing them yourself or someone else. But the challenge is with the people thing, if I sit down and I have an engineer that's struggling and I work with him for a couple hours, not on the project or whatever, but really getting him or her to understand the reason that they're having this challenge of dealing with other people or communicating or, taking people off and so forth, and really walking them through using, my coaching skills or the positive intelligence stuff, getting them to understand, the next time they deal with that in that other individual, they may get a little better, but they're not going to be perfect. And I have to do more development. And over time, eventually that the behavior is going to change. But the problem is it, it it's going to happen over a longer period of time. It's not going to happen in that little window that I got where I worked on the process improvement for an hour and I got an hour's worth of improvement. So, and what we found is probably about 2/3 of the people in the world are really causational, that they like the if then. If I do this, I get this. That gives that kind of frequency of feedback really fills them. And there's only about 1/3 of the people in the world that really prefer the correlational pieces as opposed to the causational pieces. So the thing is you have to find those individuals, and many of the people that are promoted, as you talked about, we run into this all the time. We do a lot of work with manufacturing people. It's someone it's on the shop floor for 20 years and is a great, a machine operator or a circuit board designer or, machinery person that's running in a fab for silicon. All of a sudden, now they're promoted, and voila, you have 20 people that you're managing, and they haven't been given any development. And the first thing is if they're a causational person, they're going to continue to do the kind of things that they know was successful. If indeed they're correlational, they probably have moved out of the factory much earlier. So the key is find the right person, make sure you're doing development, reward them for the people development. The best leaders really develop more leaders, more rather than just get results. And if they're a good people person, then typically that feels natural for them. If they're not a people person, it might be a little bit more work. But the nice thing is anyone with any behavioral style or anyone that is either causational or correlational can be a successful leader as long as they focus more on the people side than the task side.
Right. Because now that you are a part of the process, you are into production, but now you have to manage people. Being a people's person is like one of the skill that is required.
Yeah,
We are moving into the positive intelligence segment. And since we are speaking of people management,
sure.
what can one do to help reduce work stress and conflict? Because I understand that uh, it affects the leaders need to be quick in decision making. They need to keep on learning and developing if they're new. So how do
Yes.
they improve leadership? Can you give a quick listeners to one exercise they can begin tomorrow?
Sure. Well, so there's probably many people that are familiar with emotional intelligence, work that was done by Daniel Goleman back in the 1990s. Great work. I love Dr. Goleman's work, but I have found that his work is much more what I would say descriptive than prescriptive. And there's a wonderful book that came out, 5 or 6, 7 years ago called Positive Intelligence. And it's a book from a guy by name of Shirzad Shamin. And he basically took a lot of the work that many of the authors have done, Daniel Goleman, Howard Gardner, Dr. Martin Seligman for other types of intelligence. And what he did is he created an operating system that sits on top of. So his is much more prescriptive than descriptive. So it makes it easier to do. And what Shirzad had found out in positive intelligence is that you have what they call your saboteur brain and you have your sage brain. And the saboteurs, I'm just going to go through these very quickly. You can find a lot of stuff. If anyone wants to take the positive intelligence assessment, you can take it for free. If you go to pqtrainingandcoaching.com, there's a quick start guide on how to do that and how to access those. Hopefully you'll put that in the show notes as well, pqtrainingandcoaching.com.
Yes.
And they can take it and they can understand the strength of their saboteurs and the strength of their sage. And very quickly, there's 9 saboteurs with 1 master saboteur. And it's what Shirzad calls about the controller. There's the hyperachiever. There's that restless individual. There's the stickler. The pleaser is the hypervigilant, kind of always worried about, what else should I be doing or what should happen. The avoider. I think many of these are self-explanatory. The victim, and then the hyper-rational. And my hyper-rational is my strongest, right? Coming from a technical background, engineering background, is the hyper-rational believes that you can turn everything into numbers, and it's not about emotions. And in many cases, that's true. In many cases, that's not true. So you have those 9 saboteurs, and then you have the master saboteur, which these are kind of accomplices, called the judge, right? Where it's that voice in your head telling you, oh, you should have done this, or that's wrong, or you need to worry about this, or you need to keep this, whatever it is, right? The judge is there. So if you can do that, if you can recognize which ones are the strongest, then you can put things in place. You get lots of good details in the book. We run a 6-week program to do that, to help people work through that in small teams. That's probably the best way the best way to do that. And then basically the other half of your brain is what he calls your sage brain. And there's really 5 sage powers. There's kind of the empathize portion of your brain where you can really take the position of the other person. There's the explore brain where you're really kind of digging in and looking at everything as something new. There's the innovate brain where you can do things differently than you haven't done. There's the navigate brain, it's kind of looking forward in the future, kind of looking at your future self and what other people would do. And then there's the activate brain, and the activate brain is where most of us love to live, right? It's just doing it, right? And doing it and learning and redoing it and so forth. And the challenge is if you're always listening to your saboteurs, like my hyper rational is saying, don't pay any attention to this other person, even though they're upset. We just have to get this product out. And I go right to activate, and I don't kind of sit back and try to get a deeper understanding. We may get the product out, but I haven't really done a good job as a leader to develop or address the issues that the other person has. And I'm not talking about, for making sure that present so that they can give us the best.
I remember when we spoke during pre-interview, I was pretty amazed and I found it fascinating about this positive intelligence model and found your explanation of the sage and saboteur part of the brain particularly
Hmm.
insightful because it helps people recognize when they're reacting from fear or self-doubt versus responding with curiosity. For me, brain is very judgmental sometimes I feel, and it's quite loud in a sense, and most of the times it's fearful. And whenever I get these thoughts, I now take a pause, I take breath, and I try to understand and interpret it, and it really, now I'm responding with curiosity and clear thinking. And I guess that's a powerful shift that I have experienced and I learned from you.
Good. Well, I'm glad that you learned that. I mean, one of the things I think there's 2 things that are important for the listeners to know. First of all, having the saboteurs, you don't want to get rid of them, right? They are your early warning system. The key is you want to be able to keep them quiet as quickly as possible. It's like putting your hand, like, when there's a hot stove, if you put your hand on the hot stove, you want to be able to react to remove it very quickly. You don't want to keep it on there. And that's what the saboteurs do, right? The saboteurs say, oh, hot stove, take it off, right? They want that warning system. So you don't want to get rid of the warning system, but what you don't want to do is you don't want to feed it. If your brain is arguing with the saboteurs, then you know you're not in the sage brain. And that's really the first thing that's important. And the second thing, with regard to this is that all of this can be learned, right? That you can advance, you can do some things, you can practice those elements that you mentioned. There's tactile things that you can do. There's breathing, there's visualizations. There's all these different types of interventions that you can do. They're all outlined in the book. They go through the program that we have. But the other thing to realize is that if you study the brain in the first 90 seconds, when you've run into a situation where your saboteurs are all ignited and really, really loud, that it's that 90 seconds that your body is feeding all your brain all of these chemicals. And by stepping back, not jumping into activate mode, doing the breathing, trying to calm them down a little bit allows you to move into the sage brain. And the more that you can do that, the better results that you're going to get, the more creative you're going to be. But if you're just jumping in to deal with the saboteurs, ultimately you may get a result, but most of the time it's not going to be the best result. And usually it comes back again if you don't address it.
Right, because obviously the behavioral change is not that easy than what we expect.
Yeah.
Dr. Kevin, before moving into rapid fire round, I'd love our listener to know more about your work. What transformation are clients usually looking for?
Well, I think the big thing they're looking for, as I described before, Robbie, is they want the behavior change, right? And most of our clients usually come to us late in the game. There's some inciting factor. The people we're hiring are leaving too quickly. The good people that we've had here for many years are unhappy. The teams are not getting together. We're coming late to, delivering late on the projects, right? So something is really affecting their bottom line and their success of the company. And they usually wait too long. So one of the last companies we worked with said, yeah, we have turnover, it's 32%. Like they're turning over, a third of their workforce every year. And when you have that kind of turnover, it's very difficult to really build a sustainable team. So I guess the tip is to react, or is to be proactive rather than reactive, and address the issues before they become problems that are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to solve.
Speaking of team, bringing team together to get work, where does poor team performance usually begin? I understand that many leaders think engagement comes from compensation, but I want to understand what actually drives engagement.
Well, all of my doctoral research focused on motivation and engagement for teams. And what I found is, so there's a couple really great books people can read. The easiest book to read, which is the most commercial, is one called Drive by Daniel Pink, right? And he talks about three elements to keep people engaged: mastery, developing them, getting their skill better; autonomy, allowing them, telling them what has to be done, but not how they have to do it. Mastery, autonomy. So you just went blank here. Purpose, right? That you have to have a purpose, right? That rather than just telling them what to do, they have to understand not only why it's important to the company, but more importantly, why it's important to them. So I use the term AMP, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. You have to do that. And if you can do that, generally, I mean, you have to compensate people appropriately, but a good portion of the people are not really motivated by money. And Daniel Pink talks about that in his book Drive. They've actually, done examples. They have lots of studies that they've done where they've given people more money, and it actually negatively affects the performance because it stifles a lot of the creativity. And then the second book to read is a book called Flow, Flow. And Flow was written back in the 1990s by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he was the department chair of the University of Chicago's Department of Psychology. And what flow was retermed in the 1990s as being in the zone. I think people would understand that, getting in the zone, like Olympic athletes. And what Dr. Csikszentmihalyi had found is that when you have the right balance of skill and challenge, right, where those two meet, you kind of get the center flow, what he calls the flow channel. When I give you the right level of challenge and you have the right level of skill, you can kind of get in the zone. And people say, I'm not sure, what's getting in the zone like? It's like, well, when you look up at the clock and it's midnight and you swear it's still 9 o'clock and you've missed those 3 hours, you don't know what has happened to them. That's flow. And the nice thing about flow, you can usually get more productivity, but more importantly, it pretty much guarantees that you're going to get that creativity because you're so embedded in there. And I was fortunate enough that when I was doing my doctoral dissertation, I got a chance to work with him to help develop an assessment to identify areas that can help keep you in flow.
Speaking of flow state, I remember my friend telling me about the same concept, but labeling it as God mode. There was a time where I was able to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, do my study, get some certifications, work out also,
Hmm.
and have full control of the work life and personal life as well. And that mode, the so-called flow or the God mode, was really amazing period. And I believe that in your work, from our conversation, is that meaningful work isn't just about achieving results, it's about working with purpose. And I guess I believe that is one of the reason I do this podcast out of passion. And your work helped me understand is deeply rooted in psychology and with practical tools and steps that one can take to help understand how their mindset shapes their decisions, relationship, and performance.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I'm glad. Yeah, I've I've also heard about it in God mode, and the key is it's connecting all of the pieces, right? You're not going to be able to do everything during the day that has a purpose to everything. There's going to be certain things that you have to do. You have to take the dog out, or you have to clean the dishes, or you have to go drive to the store to get something. There's probably not a ton of purpose in there, but for the work that you do, making that connection to be able to say, hey, these, these 18 engineers that I worked with today, and I helped them work through really difficult situations, they each have 10 people, and that's 100 people that they're going to touch, right? And they're going to make their job better, their lives better, their work better. That fulfills my purpose of just really helping people get better. And and I think it's so important to make those connections for yourself, but more importantly, the best leaders make those connections for their team members, because a lot of the team members, particularly if you're working like with line workers in a factory, that most of the people are not thinking about purpose. They're just thinking, hey, if I don't get 40 hours and 5 hours of overtime here, I'm not going to be able to make my mortgage payment or my car payment, or we're not going to be able to buy the stuff for the kids that we need. And that's where their focus is. But if you can get them to add on top of that focus the connection to purpose, then all of a sudden life becomes a little bit less routine and a little bit more direct.
Right. I like to use the word meaningful.
Yes.
Whenever I achieve something, I say that it is meaningful. Okay, we are moving on to a quick rapid fire. I will
Okay,
take
let's do it.
request to one word answer if possible, but I'm not
Okay.
sure if that's the case. But let's see.
I'll,
Great
I'll do my
leaders are
best.
born or made.
Yes.
Sure.
Both.
Okay. Okay. One leadership book everyone should read. I'm sure you have mentioned it earlier also, but still one.
The Leader of Oz.
Perfect. I was hoping that answer. And one leadership myth people should stop believing.
Only aggressive people can be leaders.
That's deep. One habit every manager should stop immediately.
Doing the work their teams should be doing.
One interview question every hiring manager should ask.
What's your purpose in life?
One quality you'll hire before experience.
Emotional connection.
A coffee or tea.
Coffee.
And one piece of advice you'd give your 25-year-old self.
Start thinking as a leader much earlier in your life.
Great. And Dr. Kevin, one final question. Imagine someone listening today is leading a team, feeling overwhelmed, or wondering whether they are truly capable of becoming a great leader. What's that one message you'd like to take them to take away from today's conversation?
Yeah. So the one message is delegate and the way you can tell whether you should be delegating work, not dumping. We're not talking about dumping work on people. Delegating work is you have to ask yourself if what I am doing or what I'm holding on to and the work that I'm doing, by not giving it to one of my team members, am I limiting their development or advancement? And if the answer is yes, where it can be helpful for them, even though it may take them 10 hours and take you 2 hours, the best leaders delegate to the individuals. Doesn't mean they don't help them or coach them or whatever, but the key is the next time the same situation comes up, instead of taking 10 hours, it'll take 8 hours or 6 hours or 4 hours. But ultimately, it gets the work off of the lower level work off of your plate so you can do the strategic work.
Superb. Thank you so much, Dr. Kevin. It has been a pleasure learning from your experience and your work through Magna Leadership Solution. For everyone listening, if you'd like to learn more about Dr. Kevin's executive coaching, positive intelligence program, leadership development workshops, and the work for Magna Leadership is doing, the organizations around the world, we included all the links in the episode description. For our listeners, Dr. Kevin, if they want to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Easiest way is send me an email to kevin@magnaleadership.com, MAGNA leadership.com. And my promise to you is I never do any sales pitches. I will not try to sell you anything. If I can be helpful, provide you the tools, answer any additional questions you have, that would be my honor and pleasure to do. And if at some point in time you want to work with me more in the future, great. And if I get and give you everything that you need at that time, that's great as well. So no sales pitch for me. I love to have the next level of discussions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Kevin. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please follow Corporate Elements, leave us a review, and share this conversation with someone who's leading a team or aspiring to become a better leader.
All right. Thanks again, Robbie.